Everybody, good morning, depending on where you're joining from. My name is Benjamin Ngaru, and I'm the co-founder of the East African Center for Forced Migration and Displacement. Welcome to the first of a series of our pop-up sessions. This session is co-created together with our colleagues from Refugees International and Inkomoko. Our policy pop-up sessions are an opportunity for policymakers, humanitarians, academia, and development actors to engage away from their silos. Since the enactment of Kenya's Refugees Act number 10 of 2021, Kenya continues to witness positive developments in legislative and policy matters related to refugee management. These include the Refugees General Regulations, Legal Notice number 39 of 2024, the Kenya Citizenship and Immigration Amendment Regulations, Legal Notice number 198 of 16th December 2024, the Kenya National Qualifications Framework General Regulations, Legal Notice number 94 of 30th May 2025, the Kenya Information and Communications Registration of Telecommunication Service Subscribers, Legal Notice number 90 of 30th May 2025, and of course, as you're all very aware, Shirika plan that was endorsed by the Kenyan Executive in March 2025. With us today is an excellent panel to discuss this and other strides and the implications within the context of refugee financial inclusion, decent jobs, recognition of prior learning, access to refugee documentation, and much more. Our panelists are Mr. John Burugu, Caroline Njuki, Abdullahi Halake, Patrick Muthoi, and Abdi Sebi. Welcome, panelists, and feel free to introduce yourselves in that order.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Burugu, Commissioner for Refugee Affairs.
Good afternoon. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be logged in from. And my name is Caroline Njuki. I serve with the International Labour Organization.
Greetings, my name is Abdullahi. I work with Refugees International, covering the East and the Horn.
Hello, my name is Patrick. I'm currently a visiting fellow with the University of Oxford's Refugee Studies Center. Nice to be here.
And good afternoon from Kenya. My name is Abdi Sebi. I will be representing Inkomoko in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you, everybody else, for joining us today. Perhaps we could begin with the government as the mandated organization to host refugees. Commissioner Burugu, Kenya recently published a legal notice number 90 of 30th May, gazetting the refugee ID as a valid document for KYC purposes in telecommunication subscriber registration. Additionally, the qualifications framework are a set of commitments by states set under the Djibouti Declaration. Does the recent gazettement of the Kenya National Qualifications Framework, as well as the Refugees ID, fulfill Kenya's obligations in this regards? Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you, Benjamin, and other discussants. I think first and foremost is to appreciate the long-term hosting by the Kenyan government, open door policy on refugees, and also appreciate the fact that the landscape on humanitarian support has been changing, very dynamic, way back from 2016 in terms of the sustainability. And thereof, the call for the countries to adopt innovative ways of sustainable hosting and management of refugees. Together with that, I think is the aspect of the potential, the talents and skills that has remained untapped over time, and therefore to ease the burden on the host country and also the community. Kenya has weighed in terms of looking at ways and systems in terms of reforms, legal reforms that would support the enhanced space of empowering the refugees to be self-reliant. We move from the humanitarian to development. And in this regard, the KYC and financial inclusion has been one of the, and still remains a bit in terms of the physical account opening under the Banking Act for the refugees. The 30th May amendment of the Telecommunication Service Subscribers Regulations, under Section 5E, the refugees can now own and be able to operate mobile services, and that is majorly a big step in so far as empowering the refugees and opening the opportunity for them to get into the telecoms space. The transactions that happen normally for the Kenyans in terms of M-Pesa would also be available to them. And the amendment also takes cognizance of the fact of the household-led, maybe girls or a boy that may not have a parent, and therefore a guardian can step in relation to ownership of the SIM card, and therefore they would be able to give guarantee in that regard. So we find the regulations to be opening a new platform and opportunity for empowerment. Many of Kenyans are agents. Today, Equity and Inkomoko has about 152 agents, principally for their banking services. But now with this enhancement, the telecoms can choose their agents, and that is also part of empowering the refugee directly and the host community. In relation to also diaspora remittances that may happen through this same channel. And therefore, I find that this is quite a milestone. We, however, still remain with a physical account, but undoubtedly, with the innovation that Kenyans have had, I think that you are able to get into your bank account and bank at hand. You are able to transfer the money into your M-Pesa and be able to transact. We have progressively moved into paperless transactions, and therefore this will happen also within the space of the refugee. And then we see, therefore, though we will finally have to have a structured legal onboarding of the refugees into the account opening, the Physical Banking Act, and the Central Bank and also the Financial Reporting Center. We have that aspect where they can still operate a lot in that. Granted also the fact that many of the establishment enterprises are also operating with the M-Pesa-based payments and therefore all transactions. This would go a long way in the integration into the economic inclusion of the refugees. So I believe that covers substantially the basis of that. I know that we still have a lot to do, particularly in the first operationalization of the same, because the government feels it is not prudent to have every SIM card vendor dishing it out to the refugees, and therefore there is a structured way and the guideline that we are waiting the Cabinet Secretary to roll out. And the other aspect is that in the requirements, the biometrics would require that that data is also properly safeguarded in terms of data sharing to the parties concerned. So those are some of the parameters that are yet to be put in place, and in due course, we have already engaged in terms of the guideline, so that then the telcos together with the other multi-agency would be able to structure a way of rollout. And I believe that already is underway. Second is also the aspect that Section 9 requires that the Kenyans or anybody who was registered by proxy, and many refugees have done so through proxy by owned SIM card owned by Kenyans, whether M-Pesa, whether the transactions, and it is an offense. And by November of this year, they should, after 6 months on the gazettement of the regulations. So let me stop there. They need to be able to have transferred or vacated that proxy to themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for those remarks, and I think coloring the landscape in terms of inclusion of refugees within the mobile platforms and telecommunication systems in Kenya. A key element of financial inclusion cannot be done or cannot be realized if we do not include skills and if we do not include the education aspect in it, which brings me to you, Caroline. Caroline, Kenya's recognition of prior learning framework and its implementation guidelines contains language that includes refugees and forcibly displaced persons. Could you please talk a little bit more about the process of developing this framework and the need for such a framing from an ILO Prospects perspective? And perhaps if I might just add one more question for you. First of all, congratulations on finishing the first milestone on the Prospects program. And I know that you've recently launched the Lessons Learned report under the Prospects program. What are the Kenya's key takeaways when it comes to skills, profiling, qualification recognition, as well as recognition of prior learning for refugees? Welcome, Caroline.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. And because the commissioner has just spoke, really allow me to also take this opportunity to commend him and the department that he leads alongside the government of Kenya for the major milestones that we have seen in doing whatever is possible to improve prospects again for refugee socioeconomic integration. We've come a long way. I've been in this space for maybe too long, and these are strides that we were hoping for so long. So to actually see them happen when I can't even say in our lifetime, but so soon is really commendable. So, Commissioner, heartfelt, congratulations on that. The recognition of prior learning policy that was adopted in Kenya last year, this is something that I really love to speak about, and I'll tell you why. So, of course, we do recognize that refugees are often in circumstances that do not allow them to showcase their expertise, the skills that they had at home, the competencies that they had at home, especially when those competencies and skills were either in a letter from their employer, they were on a certificate, and they leave this behind when they flee in search of stability and peace. And so unfortunately, that refugees are trying to enter into a labor market that is often, especially in our sub-region, biased, it's biased towards refugees. They're very thin labor markets. That's also the reality. And so many unknowns with those that would actually want to offer work to refugees. So you have all these multi-layered factors that are locking you out of the labor market. And then you have no way to showcase that you're actually an excellent pastry chef, you're an excellent mechanic, you're an excellent dressmaker. And also because we are in a society where when you're applying to a job, we first ask you to send your certification so we see your level of qualification. And only then, based on that, is when we actually invite you to an interview where you can speak, demonstrate fully your qualification. So without certification, it becomes very difficult for refugees to actually get into, especially wage employment. And so with this realization, of course, the Prospects program, which is a partnership funded by the government of the Netherlands, is really looking at how it is that we can, support refugees' access to the labor market, different parameters. So let me go back to RPL. And so we approached the government of Kenya to discuss how important this is. And while it was welcome, the government informed us that they didn't have such a framework that would benefit Kenyans themselves. So there was, we talk about inclusion, but you cannot include people in what does not exist. And so, it moved from a refugee discussion into how is it that we can support the government of Kenya to develop a recognition of prior learning policy. And for me, I was absolutely excited. I'll tell you why. In many policies, many policies do not include refugees. That's the reality. Many what would be considered non-refugee policies, all right? And so here we had an opportunity not to try and include refugees in an already complete policy, but actually design and have a really significant input into how this policy looked like in regard to refugees. And of course, that I think we did. We were able to have not just language and not just to say and refugees, because at times we look for only that and refugees, and then it doesn't mean so much. So we really included provisions that take into consideration the specific context and realities of refugees. And not just that, it was, the policy was coming at the tail end with a pilot phase, because we needed to test. This was new in Kenya for the government, for all of our stakeholders. So we needed to test and feedback already what it is, the findings of that pilot test. And the pilot test actually included, it was like 60% refugees and 40% Kenyans. So it was an exciting process, of course, throughout the policy cycle. And I've mentioned about the feedback that we got before actually finalizing the policy. It was really broad-based. We had actors in the refugee space. We worked very closely, for instance, with IRC, with the International Refugee Committee. We worked very closely with Commissioner Burugu, of course, with DRS. We really were able to bring in actors that were relevant and that had something to shape this policy with. And that also involved not just discussing the text, but also designing the tools, because these are very specific tools that you use. And especially because there was a lot of contestation around whether this was awarding people qualifications through the back door. So how is it that you're telling me that I have never been to a formal institution, I'm a very good mechanic, and suddenly you want to offer me a qualification at master craftsperson level? So there was a lot of misgivings, and we needed to demonstrate how these actually work. So we have the tools, we build capacities for assessors, for institutions, and we even developed what is called a differentiated unit cost. So whatever, if you're being, if you're going through recognition of prior learning as a mechanic, it costs different from if you're doing this for a dressmaker, and that's just because of what goes into the cost. So that has been really useful. We are having an expanded, what we are calling an expanded pilot, and focusing also on what are the areas, what are the occupations that our refugees are more likely to be working in, because it's not, it's not so open in the economy, to be honest. And also it's also the skills that the refugees have. So we are having the profiling of the skills that refugees have and experiences, and looking at whether that aligns with where they can work, while at the same time supporting the rollout of recognition of prior learning broadly in Kenya. Let me stop there. And of course, we've seen those transitions. We've seen the hope that this brings to refugees. We've seen people that were, we have one gentleman, I forget his name, and he says, I am no longer invisible. I have this certificate, I put it on my shop. When people come in, I negotiate better with them. So it's dignity, it's not just access to work, that's of course really paramount, but it's what this gives to people who had lost their certification, their proof of competence. Yes, so we launched the lessons learned report from ILO's implementation of Prospects Phase 1. I think that was on World Refugee Day or just thereafter. And in regards to skills profiling, I'll skip on RPL because I've spoken just already too much into it. One is the importance of linking any skills intervention to the realities of the labor market. You know, that it is the skills, the competencies that are required by the local labor market that should determine what skills interventions we have. So if the local labor market is, you know, there's lots of investments in agriculture, then we should be looking at, okay, what are the occupations that are going to drive the investments in agriculture? Are those occupations that are open to refugees? And in Kenya, I mean, a lot of them are. There is not, I mean, it's not like, for instance, in the Middle East or in the Arab states where they have restrictions and saying you can only work in agriculture. In Kenya, it's pretty open. Of course, there are many other dynamics, of course, but the labor market is pretty open. And so using that to work with local training institutions to curate curricula that helps refugees to take advantage of this investment. So that's really important. Two, linked to this is the capacity of training institutions in refugee hosting areas. Of course, we do know that in Kenya, TVET institution is at 2 levels. We have the national technical training institutions receiving exchequer support directly, and then we do have the local VTCs, vocational training centers that are county run, county supported. And then of course we do have many others that are run by church-based organizations or faith-based organizations, etc. And it's very important that, you know, we work with those training institutions to build their capacity for skills anticipation so that they don't, you know, many of them have got that this list of 5 or 6 or 10 areas of focus that they haven't changed for the last 20 years or since they started. And yet the labor market, the economic realities are changing. So it's looking at what are the changes that are happening and how are you preparing yourself to develop curriculum, but to also have your trainers able to deliver on those curriculums. So that is an area that we've been investing in, both at the national and local level. So national level, we're working with the Kenya School of TVET to train better because these are actually the trainers that are posted to the local levels. But we're also trying to see how we can make TVET training or TVET training more accessible through leveraging now on technology. So right now I can just mention, you know, that we are going through a process of supporting trainers to augment how they develop their curriculum using artificial intelligence so that it's more relevant, etc. And lastly is employment services, because there's such a huge disconnect between the skills that refugees have, making them visible and matching them to the local labor market. In Kenya, of course, employment services are still rather weak, but we've been working with NEA, even as we build their capacities to deliver employment services at the national level. You know, we've said these areas cannot be left behind. And because they don't have the stretch, that bigger stretch, we've started working, and in the last phase of Prospects, we've worked with NEA to train local CSOs, you know, organizations that stay and deliver to provide employment services that is aligned with the national approach to employment services. And you'd be surprised, Benjamin, and those that are online. In areas where people are not getting jobs, you know, we get people say, I have done my resume in a better way. I know how to present myself. You know, they are going through peer-to-peer support. And young people in refugee camps are accessing jobs. Jobs you were saying are not there. because employers are looking, you know, but we have to find a way of matching, making the qualifications visible, preparing refugees so that they know how to present themselves, to identify the opportunities, but also to present themselves, and also working very much with employers so that they don't just use word of mouth for advertising, making those opportunities that are they have within the organizations visible. And we've seen incredible success there. And I think those are the three. I've spoken to RPL, so I'd rather not go back into that. I would say that is the larger, those are some of the lessons learned that have come out specifically on skills development. Thank you, Benjamin, and sorry if I was a bit too long.
Not a problem at all. Thank you so much, Caroline, and thank you for the way in which you are passionate about RPL and the inclusion of refugees in some of these spaces. And I'm actually shocked to learn that there was no framework for nationals themselves, let alone for refugees, because we're always used to working with government as a primary responsibility holders and ensuring that there's inclusion of refugees. So for our difference, it's necessary you working with it the other way around. I think this very well ties into the work of Refugees International and a very recent study by Refugees International in March 2025, which noted that the Kenya's Refugees Act and the attendant frameworks and regulations, such as the qualifications framework, offers a promising model in refugee integration. As Kenya becomes increasingly urbanized, with 16% of refugees residing in urban spaces, these legislative developments remain throttled by certain administrative barriers in accessing work permits for refugees. So for example, if ILO has done a fantastic job in establishing qualifications frameworks together with government, then when refugees have their skills recognized in their quest to access work permits, there's certain challenges that might exist. So this brings me to you, Abdullahi. What other red tape did you identify in your study, and how do policymakers and practitioners address them to ensure that the dream that Caroline and ILO and government and yourselves and other stakeholders have in the effective integration of refugees in Kenya? Welcome, Abdullahi.
No, thank you so much, Benjamin. I mean, again, thank you for bringing all of us together to make this happen. I think it's not very often, you know, something that is alive and breathing as law and policies are being developed, then they get discussed, because you see it working in real time. I want to echo what Caroline and Commissioner Burugu said at the top, which is that Kenya has taken a massive step. This is a significant you know, political will that the Kenyan authorities have demonstrated at the highest level at the time when, you know, Western countries have really moved away from a fairly progressive refugee policies, including, you know, parties that were in the past very receptive to the idea of refugees and migration. Borders are hardening, and Kenyan authorities, despite even, you know, the United States and other Western donors pulling aid, Kenyan authorities stayed the course. On March 28th of this year, Shirika Plan was launched. But I think one thing that we have to be very careful, and I mentioned three of them, is managing of the expectations. Policy processes anywhere in the world move very slowly. And so sometimes the fruit of all this investment, despite Kenya making a significant pivot from, you know, what we all knew was an encampment model that was expensive, that was outdated, that we now have 3 generations of refugees. I think moving to the humanitarian space, I think we need to manage expectations with respect to what the law and policy will deliver, not just for the Kenyan authorities, but also for the refugees who are the direct beneficiaries. I think the second thing that the first thing of the many after those few points is, I think the question around registration is still really, really important, because registration of refugees has been on and off for various reasons that the government has given, not least because of security reasons, and attempt by the Kenyan authorities in the past to try and close the refugee camps. So that process really needs to be rethought, because whereas to the host communities and people like myself who are Kenyans, we see registration having tax fee and having registration, tax compliance, and all these as a very boring, banal background exercise that goes on while you go on with your life. They are just soundtrack. You go through the process. You're born at the hospital. Even if you're not born at the hospital, you'll be able to get your birth certificate. But for the refugees, it's the distance between being seen, like Caroline said, and being completely unseen and do not exist. I think that process could benefit from really it being tightened, really it being pretty quick. Then therefore the refugees will be able to access all these relevant services that majority of them in the Kenyan case are online, with a driving license and all the rest. The second is, I think, the interoperability of the registration bureau data and the registration and the refugee registration data. Because as a Kenyan, if I plug in my national ID, I'll be able to get all those services. But for the refugees, I think that process is still in transition. But that means some of the refugees will not be able to get the benefit that will accrue as a result of Refugee Act 2021. The third one that I would want to echo is the question around labor market access. And this is specifically the question around Class M work permit, where question, I think, 18 and 19, and question 18 is around, has the employer taken all the necessary steps to ensure that there are no qualified Kenyans, and therefore this refugee is the one who is going to get this particular position. I think the reason why we are having that as a backlog is Class M work permit was not designed for the refugees. It was initially designed for the expatriates. That question is very relevant for the expatriates. I think for the refugees, if it can be waived, that is question 19. And question 18, with regards to, that's question 18. I think question 19 with regards to the training of a Kenyan who will eventually take over. I think with respect to, that refugee being very unique, yes, enough number of refugees come with skills, certification that can be assessed and they'll be able to pass. But majority of them get 6 months, 8 months, training. And so therefore it's very highly unlikely that a Kenyan will not possess what the skills and training that refugees will have. And so therefore that will make things very difficult. I want to end by addressing the question around, labor market. Kenya has a very squeezed labor market, right? I think probably under 1 million, that is the Kenyan government, and then slightly over 1 million, probably 2 million, that is private sector. This is very difficult space to get jobs. 1 million Kenyans join, they come out of, all the training institutions, and we have something between, 6 to 7% unemployment rates. And majority of the Kenyans, probably around 80%, are aged between 15 and 35. We've seen protests last year, last year during the budget process, this year during the budget process, a lot of it being led by young men and women for the primary reason of, the government not being able to provide jobs. So I think when I mentioned having, managing expectations, that is the one thing that I was speaking about. Finally, I think DRS is in many ways, there is a significant disconnect between the primary functions that DRS is given, including being responsible for all the registration and administrative issues of the refugees, coordination of all the refugees and asylum issues, as well as all the operational aspect. But if you look the amount of resources that DRS is being given to deliver in literally everything around refugees, there is a significant mismatch. I think they received probably less, around 151 million, 21 of that for, other operational issues of traveling and coming back. That is very difficult for the DRS to deliver. So I think DRS is being placed in a position where probably they will not be able to deliver on all these aspects. And one way around that is probably not this year, obviously. 24-25 budget has been read. I think for next year, one ways of doing, or at least correcting some of this, is making DRS a semi-autonomous government agency where it gets significantly more funding from the exchequer than it is now, because its current state makes it very difficult for DRS to deliver. And finally, I think some of these movements can be sorted out through having a comprehensive refugee management policy, because I think this law touches on probably 24 other legal aspects. I think that makes it very difficult for the coordination. For instance, just like the SIM card and the M-Pesa from the SIM card are being managed by two separate agencies. You know, the SIM card is Communications Authority, and the money within the SIM card, that is the M-Pesa, is the Treasury. But if you have a comprehensive refugee policy outlining all these things, then ministries, departments, and agencies will be able to resolve them without necessarily, dealing with them individually. I'll stop at that and thank you. And I might apologize that I have to really dash to the airport to catch my next flight. But I'll be tuning in on my phone, and I'll be probably able to answer some of your questions. And thank you so much once again to you, Benjamin, as well as those who are attending and the fellow panelists.
Thank you so much, Abdullahi. And I'm really glad that you got a chance to speak about your March report. I believe that you have a subsequent report coming out in the next couple of days and months and weeks.
It is probably less than 2 weeks. We'll have the final edition of 1, 2, 3 reports on the same. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much to yourself and to Caroline Njuki, who I know is also having to drop off at this point because she's traveling. So thank you so much for both of you for joining us. Before we go to the next panelist, I do request that participants, if you have any questions, before we go to the question and answer session next, that you just drop your questions in the chat box. Abdullahi has spoken about cuts in terms of funding and the mismatch between the responsibilities of DRS and the funding that is available, which is, I think, a broader issue, but also in terms of jobs, which sort of brings us to the next panelist at Inkomoko. There was a 2025 study by the Refugees Economies Program in Kakuma that found that when aid was cut by 20%, there's a resultant contraction in the informal credit systems. But the refugees that Inkomoko lends to are increasingly turning to online work platforms such as Upwork. However, access-related challenges have led to deplatforming and exclusion of refugees from digital jobs due to KYC requirements by financial service providers and telcos. So to you, Abdi, how does the recently gazetted regulations address these challenges in lending, and what more could be done, and what does Inkomoko do to leverage on the regulations that have been enacted or published in the recent past? Over to you, Abdi.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Like I said earlier on, I'll be joining this via audio. And having said that, just back to your question, I think the regulation that has been gazetted thus recently has played a very big role, especially in the space where we operate. And again, if you look at previously, we had a lot of issues, especially having been, lending to the refugee space for a very long time. We've had issues about KYC, of which other mainstream financial institutions were not able to come in because of the KYC issues, and then also the AML anti-money laundering issues. But again, now Inkomoko decided to come into this space. And I must say that, this regulation is going to be a game changer, especially in transforming the lives of the refugees. Initially, if you look at what we are doing, as much as we are lending to the refugee, but there are some risks that, Inkomoko is taking as an institution, especially related to KYC. And these risks are not being, the mainstream financial institutions actually are not willing to take such risk. And by introduction of this, gazettement of this regulation, like I said, is going to be a game changer. For example, if you look at, in regards to access to, let's say, access to digital financing, like the commissioner has well said that, there are some refugees as we speak now who have actually gone ahead and, register into these platforms via proxies. And in the next few months or so, it will become very, very difficult for them, because now with the enforcement of the law that the commission has talked about, then it's going to criminalize all this act. So, for example, now once that one is done, then it will limit the refugees in terms of access to digital financing. And also there's some lending institutions which actually introducing platforms in terms of apps and so on and so forth, and you cannot be able to register into these platforms if you don't have a recognized identity card. So it will really help in that platform. And then number two, it will also, in one way or another, streamline government services. In which way? If you look at how the government operates, there are some privileges that probably the refugees are not able to enjoy. And by now bringing this one on board, I think refugees will be equally enjoying these privileges, just like the normal citizens. And again, I must speak to something which is very, very pertinent to us as Inkomoko, as a lending institution to refugees. If you look at our business model as we speak now, we give more focus to refugees, right? And these are space whereby other mainstream financial institutions are not able to venture into because of, one, the risk that I've talked about, and then number two, most of these banks are actually giving collateralized loans, and by virtue that the refugees do not have collaterals to secure those loans, because now if a refugee does not have a formal documentation, it becomes also very, very difficult to even acquire properties or even to have assets. So that one also limits them in terms of accessing, collateralized loans. And again, the integration of the Shirika plan by itself is going to be very, very easy, in terms of trade, right? Because if you look at now, the way the situation is now, the refugees are actually confined into the camps, and that one limits them in terms of how they're going to do their business and so on and so forth. So now, if the law is now operationalized, it's going to be very, very easy, because most of these refugees, as we speak now, they only depend on the market that is within the camps. But again, once they integrate with other members of the society, then that means that the access to market to their businesses will be a little bit enhanced for that matter. And again, if you look at it in terms of what Madam Njuki was talking about, there are some documents which are very, very important here in Kenya, and one of them is actually ID. At times, you might be able to even acquire, qualifications, be it, within the country or outside the country. But again, for a refugee now to get a job, it becomes a different issue. But now with this, Shirika plan, and then the integration of this, this law, I think it will, become a little bit easier for even, the refugee themselves to compete, be it formal or even informal sectors for this job, because what will happen is that it will now be a public knowledge that now the refugees themselves have been now integrated to the mainstream, society. I don't know whether there was a second question to that effect. Benjamin, please remind me.
I think I matched the two questions for you, and because of time, I think we can just sort of have a hard stop there, if that's okay with you.
Maybe I can just rush through. I think I've gotten that. Let me just rush through, take 2 minutes and then just rush through the question itself. And I think, the question was a study has been done within Kakuma, and then there's this element of, fund cuts, which came from mainly from World Food Program, and how it has really affected the displaced community, and how Inkomoko has come in to do what? To try and remedy the situation. But again, yes, this one did affect quite a lot of our clients. And it did affect them in the sense that, the repayment of our loans went a little bit down, right? And then number two, there was also an issue of market linkages, because the credit system by itself, the wholesalers who actually supply to the small business people within the camp could not do that because they did not have stock. So what happens is that, how did we come in? One of the things that we did is actually, just to make sure that, we give them what we call an interest moratorium. How does this interest moratorium assist them? It assists them in this way. Now, for example, now, if you look at now the big wholesalers or the SME clients who operate within this, within this setup, what happens is that the small traders normally come to them also to buy from them and then go and sell, in their small retail shop. So what happens is that, if they don't have, that money is not in circulation, then what does it mean? It means that they won't have stock for the small traders to come and buy. So what we did is that we decided to give them top-ups, just to make sure that they have a lot of stock, and to just keep the, the value chain running. And then we also, did a lot of loan restructuring, just to make sure that we reduce the payment. We reduce the installment paid, and probably, increase the loan period. And we also made sure that, especially to the small business people, we also made sure that we give what we call idea stage loan. This idea stage loan, there's no much into it in terms of appraisal. So what we do is that we bring all of them together, and we screen their ideas. We look at, some of the displaced people who actually have very good ideas, and we feel that we can be able to do what? We can be able to venture or to invest into. And we did quite a number of them as we speak. And I think it has made a very, very big impact, positive impact, in terms of, how the credit system actually runs. Back to you, Benjamin, please.
Thank you so much, Abdi, and thank you for the work that you do in terms of lending to those within the informal systems, noting the very fragile status of the credit profiles in that category of persons. But I think it would be remiss not to say that studies have shown that refugees are good clients, and there's a very high rate of repayment, and I'm sure you can echo this, Abdi, in terms of refugees repaying their loans and being clients to financial service providers. And so thank you very much for that. I think we have reached the end of the first part of our session, and I would want us to then move to the second part in terms of the Q&A. But because Patrick has not spoken, I would want to start with you, Patrick. And I think I would very much link what Abdi has spoken to today in terms of the fragility of the informal credit system, but also the centrality of the informal credit system to the refugee economies, not only in Kenya, but in other areas. But I think I should first of all start by congratulating you, Patrick, on your fellowship at RSE Oxford, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here. Your recent study from Oxford highlighted that despite the move to self-reliance, assistance in Kakuma should not be withdrawn before the right to work and expanded access to services are fully realized. So the question that I have for you today, the first of two questions, is what is the current status of data and evidence on financial inclusion of refugees in Kenya? What do we know, and what still needs to be known? Which sort of links to the second question I have for you, Patrick. The Konrad Adenauer Stiftung research on the impact of aid freeze has shown that refugees are likely to fall into poverty within 6 to 12 months on exit of funding. How can financial inclusion targets be well monitored and evaluated to ensure that the sustainability of financial inclusion efforts after all that the governments and actors have done. So thank you and welcome, Patrick.
Thank you, Benjamin. And that's a loaded question. I'll try to be as brief as I can, given the time. So just briefly on the study that we did that showed the effects of excuse me, aid cards on the refugees, and just to let me just share the link of the study. You'll find it in the chat. So the study showed that in 2019, and this was being done by we did this in collaboration with under the Refugee Studies Center, University of Oxford, and we were able to show that, well, I'm not a co-author yet, but I'll be co-authoring a second paper from that study. But we show that the cuts in aid by 20% in 2019 really affected the households in the camps because there was like the refugees are very indebted. They go and borrow from retailers in the expectation that whenever the aid is sent to their card, then they will be able to pay. So when this aid was reduced, then the already indebted refugees got even into more trouble. So, and we also show that unemployment was also increased. And then, so based on that, we were really suggesting that withdrawal from aid should not be abrupt. We are really not saying, of course, we are on board in terms of movement towards the socioeconomic development, I mean, the integration and self-reliance. But we suggest that this could be done, not so abruptly, because already the situation is quite bad. The unemployment is at that time was quite high, and those who were employed were earning quite little. It was an average of like 5,800 Kenya shillings per month. That's like $45 US. That's a monthly earning, which is quite low. And of course, poverty rates were quite high. And this was also complemented by a recent World Bank study. So we know that Shirika plan is already, rolling out. But again, this is happening at a time when the aid has really been, we just spoke into that, has been cut. So I think the best thing here would be for the government to really fast track the mobilization of resources for the implementation of the Shirika plan. And, because again, we know policies take time to take effect, such large scale programs take time to show impact. But I think given the state of evidence that we have, really, it should be fast-tracked in a way. We don't know. I think that I don't know where the resources are going to come from. The government has, probably a better idea. We have the multilateral banks, but we have seen the countries, the global north cutting the aid. But the research comes at becomes a very important avenue for generating evidence on everything, really, but specifically on financial inclusion. And a lot of it has been happening in the camps. A lot of research has been happening, but I think, Benjamin, I'll not speak into specifics of, what percentages or whatever numbers they are, but, just a general description of, what we know. And my work is very easy. It's been already said. We know that refugees are bankable. The studies have shown that really they pay, there are very high rates of repayment of loans. So, there is, it's just really for the private sector to step up, and of course the government to put in place the right structures, which is already happening. Including the arrangement between IFC and Equity in Kakuma, to sort of spread the risk for the private sector. So that is one thing. And but I would speak again more to the importance of the government being involved in the generation of the evidence. I think in the past, in as long as I can remember, really research has been done by, like universities abroad or independent people. And again, we are not given copies of whatever happens. The DRS has been thankfully involved in, giving research permits for studies to be done in the camps, but I think very few organizations meaningfully involve the department in generating this evidence. So it will be very important for the government to be part and parcel of the evidence generation, and that would mean then refugees become part of the official statistics. I know there is something happening right now between the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics and UNHCR and DRS, a project on the data collection, which includes refugees. So that's really a good step forward. But there are also other things that need to be strengthened, which is the availability of the administrative data. Earlier, the commissioner talked about the, when the biometric information data for refugees is onboarded on the systems, then how secure are they? And, to add on to that, who will be able to access this data? If we need information on the number of probably refugees with SIM cards or bank accounts, where can we get this information? And wherever the data is sitting, who has access to it, what levels of access, because we know refugees are, protected population, and data privacy would be quite useful, and security, data security, and all that. So it is really a lot that we can speak about. I just really scratch the surface, but really research and evidence is the cornerstone of all the planning or the decision we can ever make as researchers, policymakers, and government. And there is need to really be able to continuously generate data. My last point would really be on, as part of the Shirika plan, I think there is the plan to have to establish municipalities. And what a lot of people have asked is whether freedom of movement will be just confined within municipalities or beyond. In other forums, I've had the commissioner clarify this, but just wanted to throw in, some recent evidence there showing that, the economic benefits to the country and to the refugees themselves will be better if the freedom of movement is more expanded beyond, distances such as what the municipalities will cover. So I think, of course, these are baby steps in the right direction, but we hope in the future the government will be able to expand this freedom of movement to beyond the municipalities. Of course, people can apply to go where they want, but because of the way the system is set up, sometimes people find themselves unable to travel to be able to buy, for example, goods for business and all that. So I'll stop here and probably get some adding to that during the Q&A. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Patrick, for talking about your work and your study, but also introducing the concept and the element of freedoms. And so I would want to come back to Commissioner Burugu and talk a little bit more about certain freedoms. So, for example, we know that East African citizens have certain freedoms that they enjoy under the EAC Treaty. Kenya's Refugees Act, Section 28.8, talks about a mechanism to opt out from the status of being a refugee and perhaps enjoy certain benefits available to East African citizens under the East African Treaty, East African Community Treaty, or the Common Market Protocol. So my question to you, Commissioner, is that the Kenya Citizenship and Immigration Amendment Regulations, that's legal notice number 198 of the 16th of December, 2024, introduced a new Class R permit for East African community citizens. Is there a possibility that this is a move to operationalize Section 28.8 of the Refugees Act on refugees opting out to enjoy benefits under the East African Community Treaty? And perhaps if I would pose a second question to you in light of the environment that we find ourselves in, Kenya has now brought in legislative and policy-related progressive steps and strides, as Caroline mentioned. How do we, in the environment that we find ourselves in, make sure that these steps in terms of policy frameworks and legislation are sustainable, and what is needed from the other actors? Commissioner, before we go to you, I would encourage our participants to post their questions in the chat box. Thank you, and over to you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Benjamin. I think basically the progressive build-up on policy enhancement, the reforms, way back from the gazettement of the 6 refugee identification documents, legal notice number 143 of September 2023. And again, the Kenya being party to the resolution of December in the introduction of Class R for the East Africans. That aligns with the Section 28.8 of the Refugee Act, number 10 of 2021. Indeed, this has been an area that East African refugees from the East African region would benefit. But even if with the resolution, we are yet to get the detailed or rather country-unique mechanism in which one would vacate. Would they first have to leave the country to go and now enjoy, or at what point would a refugee? What would be the mechanism? The overall policy has been embraced, but as to the procedure, step 1, 2, 3, what one needs to do, is it fill a form? Where is the template? And such is yet to be worked out. But granted that East Africans then would have that would, by dint of its adoption, obviously now sort of introduce some movement, because a Ugandan would be in Kenya and then they would enjoy such kind of leverage. The challenge remains that would all East African countries, even without adoption, be able to open that protocol for enjoyment? Would we enjoy it in the member states of the East African Community by equal measure, so that then we are not seen to be shifting a huge population to one country. And yes, there could be a labor opportunity, but at the same time, we look at other parameters. And then therefore, then again, when we are exiting the refugee status, what about the security considerations? Because it is weighing heavy on access to labor and decent income. But what about the other considerations, bearing in mind that, yes, there has been a lot of concern that the refugee remains within the security ranks, but that cannot be lost in the essence of the national interest. So we have a few considerations to be done, and then therefore, while we welcome the protocol of Class M, we also must be cognizant of the fact that there has to be a proper balance that is articulated, and also applicability, standardized application of the same by the member states. In relation to free movement, I believe that this is an issue that still I may have mentioned in relation to the security considerations. And for now, in the setup that we have of the municipality, the sub-county, and the county itself, those are the three areas within which free movement, especially with the first phase of the Shirika Plan implementation, where we would have the refugees and the host community interacting freely within a municipal jurisdiction, and the sub-county, which like Dadaab and Turkana West. And beyond that, then it would be within the Turkana County. The question obviously begs, movement is informed by need. And when we just say, let them go to Homa Bay, Kakamega, Kiambu, and Meru, well, you know, it is not the issue of just roaming. That's one. Two, the fact that me and you, any citizen can go to any part of the country is because the country has their full data consolidated. We do not have a consolidated data for the refugees. And that is why the government has been pushing, seeking resources to have a refugee database, against which it would be interfaced with e-citizen, so that they would be able now to access the online services accessible to Kenyans. They would also have their database interfaced with the other databases of the immigration, so that we know who is where at what particular time, and other databases of the police, so that then we secure everybody. It is not just targeting the refugees, but we secure everybody and ensure that the movement for one is not going to jeopardize the security of the other. The other aspect is that I want to urge my colleagues who have spoken in terms of the digital rendering. Inkomoko appreciated the fact that they have done a lot in skills development, the balancing of books, education, and also accessing entrepreneurial soft loans to the refugees. What the SIM card regulations are coming to do is not to deny or stifle the digital rendering platform, but to streamline, in the essence, remove the blackmail that has been there between the SIM card owner and the holder or the operator, where the refugee has been operating, and whenever they go to the owner Kenyan registered, then you find that there are demands. But when now they own the SIM card, which should be done by November, bearing in mind that they will have streamlined, owned, and then transferred whatever properties and assets that are related to that SIM card, then that would enhance their security more. I think the other aspect is that for the digital rendering and the entrepreneurship to the refugees, we would also urge them to vacate any collaterals and soft loans that are registered using the passports, because refugee cannot be a refugee and then they have their country of origin passport, either in a SIM card or in terms of collateral loans, because that again now you are lending to a Congolese who is in the country. So there are those other aspects that are there. But the SIM card has a wider leverage in terms, including learning, online transactions and trading. And also now integrating the AI that would really help in leveraging by the youth in the spaces that we are moving into. The differentiated assistance application, allow me to just digress a bit on that. It is targeted to certain, to the categories 1, 2, 3, 4, where the fourth one is not getting anything except that we are supporting the policy and legal reforms, regulatory instruments that would support their enhanced self-reliance and support the upscaling for bigger numbers to self-reliance. The categories 1 and 2, which would get 40% from August, bearing in mind that we have also World Food Program stopped the Baba Chakula. It is not lost on government that the credit system economy, the credit economy that was running, where a whole chain of supply, manufacturer, wholesaler, retailer, the shopkeeper and the refugee himself or her would really rely on the trust of the other for the money once it arrives. And this is an economy that has really got challenges since 2019, as mentioned, when we came down 20%. Now we are down to 30%. And that has increasingly affected the credit economy, not only for the refugee, but for the hosts. And we believe that if proper mechanisms are put in place, the private sector would really upscale. And I commend Inkomoko for scaling up the loans that they already have with the refugees and also the host community, and also restructuring in terms of topping up so that then they can be a bit credit comfortable, as well as now extending what was initially there. I believe that it is something that is work in progress, and we can still work together. Humanitarian assistance remains our biggest challenge, even as we roll out the aspect of Shirika Plan, because food cannot wait for the reforms and programs that we are putting up. So we still are appealing to the development community, international community, to play its role in the shared arrangement, shared responsibility principle, so that then we can comfortably as a country continue hosting. Otherwise, we would be forced to revisit and relook, have a serious relook whether it is sustainable to continue hosting, or be able to have a framework in which we would be asking the countries that are stable to take up their nationalities because it would not be prudent also for the country to have a situation where we are keeping a population that is not stable, that is not secure, that is not food secure within our country and within the camps. And that therefore the balance has to be struck moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Burugu. And then I think the issue about responsibility sharing is one that continues to be of important discussion, not just in Kenya, but also in other refugee hosting communities, more so especially because of the gaps that exist on this particular matter under the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees. Commissioner, as we wind down, there is a question in the Q&A chat box, and I think it's only fair that I pose it to government as we seek to go ahead and mainstream and include refugee issues within national systems and plans. There's a question whether there are intentions of having employment entities and agencies that will support refugees who are seeking employment, but also prepare them for the job market under the national systems. That's a question from an anonymous person within the listeners. Commissioner, over to you.
I believe that that is a natural development, in the sense that once the frameworks are in place, it is only prudent it would only be business sense for the private sector to step in. Because currently we have the National Employment Authority that structures programs of labor access, local and international, for the citizens. But as Caroline Njuki talked about, then there's need for specific to the refugees, and that would be for the private entities to come forward. And for the government, I think it is for us to create a conducive environment to open up the reforms in labor. Currently, you may be aware that we have already worked together with the Social Protection State Department to collect the vulnerability data and therefore support not only interventions. So for government is to see how best, whatever data we have, whatever reforms that bottlenecks that we have, we continue opening, so that then the private sector would step into the gap and be able to come up with organizations and structures that support labor access, complementary pathways for the refugees, locally and also internationally.
Thank you very much.
And maybe, Benjamin, I point out that there are such already existing with an American committee, US, I think the resettlement committee that is already in the country, that is looking at girls from Kakuma, and another one from Latin America that is yet to structure. So organizations are coming forward, and wherever government is called upon, then we would move into to restructure whatever instruments and open up, so that then they have the platform to be able to support directly the refugees. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And indeed, access to jobs is one of, or the labor mobility pathways is one of the pillars under complementary pathways as alternative solutions for refugees. Indeed, as the traditional solutions become much more narrow, I think complementary pathways such as labor mobility opportunities and pathways are indeed welcome. I think we've come to the end of this first session of the virtual policy pop-up session. We thank you very much, all of you, for choosing to participate and putting your time aside to participate. I want to thank the Commissioner for Refugees Affairs, Mr. John Burugu, Caroline from ILO Prospects, Abdi from Inkomoko, Abdullahi Halake from Refugees International, and Patrick Mudoi from RSC and a former consultant with the World Bank. Behind the scenes, I want to thank Sarah Lidom from Inkomoko, as well as Helen Dempster from the Center for Global Development, for your great efforts behind the scenes to make sure that this is a reality. Together with Sarah Miller from Refugees International and Sarah Schaeffer and her team behind the scenes to make sure that everything at the back end happens well. Thank you very much, and we do look forward to seeing you all in our next virtual policy pop-up session. Thank you, and have a lovely rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you, bye.